I want to pose a question to you. If you could go back to any point in Fortnite's history, where would you go? Well, for me, that question's pretty easy. If I could go back to any time in Fortnite's history, I would want to go back to the Chapter 3 map. What's up, everyone? My name is Jack Galactic. Welcome to the channel. So, for a lot of people, when they think of Fortnite nostalgia, the thing that always came up was either Chapter 1 or Chapter 2. In fact, it was all anything could seem to be talking about when I first started playing the game. Because you see, I didn't start playing the game until Chapter 3, Season 3, Vibin'. I often say that I didn't start playing the game until after everything that had made Fortnite had ended. I started in what we didn't know at the time, but we would come to find out soon, was the final season of Donald Mustard at the helm of Fortnite. Now at that point, the entire storyline that they had been building, starting in Chapter 1, Season 3, with the Visitor, and then the Rocket event in Chapter 1, Season 4, moving all the way through everything that had happened through Chapter 2 and into the beginning and the first 2 seasons of Chapter 3. But by the time I started, everything was done. The battle was over. The Imagined Order was finished. The story with the Seven had concluded. There was really nothing left for the game other than to just sit down and play. And play is exactly what I did. Even though I started pretty late into this game's life, I absolutely fell in love with the game of Fortnite. And I absolutely fell in love with that Chapter 3 map. Truth be told, despite the game having been out at, I think 5 years at this point, I had actually not even heard of the game of Fortnite until maybe 6 months or a year before I started playing. And even then, I didn't really understand what the game was. For those of you that don't know, maybe if you haven't seen my channel before or you haven't watched any of my live streams, I'm actually 40 years old. I am well past the point of the usual age range for folks that play video games, and especially for the, I'd say, average age demographic for the players of Fortnite. In fact, it was my then 5 or 6 year old son who introduced it to me. I don't remember exactly when, but he started showing me like clips and videos on YouTube and just saying, oh, this looks like a fun game, I'd like to play this game. And I wasn't really sure if it was a game I wanted, such a young guy to be playing. Obviously being a shooter game, in my mind I was thinking, oh, that might be a little too violent. But the more I watched clips, the more I started thinking, this looks like it would be kind of an okay game. If he wanted to try it, why not? So I downloaded the game and I let him start playing. Probably 2 or 3 weeks after he started playing was when he finally talked me into sitting down and playing around myself. And I remember I dropped in and I basically died within the first, 5 minutes of all things to the storm. Because you see, I had never played a battle royale before. I'd never even followed the genre. When I said that I watched clips of the game on YouTube, that is true, but I never watched full gameplay. So I didn't understand the mechanics. I didn't understand how you were supposed to escape the storm. And so I died pretty quickly, and I thought, this game's not very fun, it's not for me. Here you go, kid, keep playing. He's like, Dad, you gotta play another game. Just play one more. And I said, okay. So I dropped in for a second game. And that time he actually sat down and sort of explained to me how the storm works. Just, look at your mini-map, stay inside the circle, you'll be fine. And as I started running around and exploring this map and getting into a few fights, I had to admit, I fell in love with the game immediately. From that day forward, man, I was hooked on Fortnite. For the next 2 seasons, I just played, every chance I could get. I'd come home from work and I'd start playing. I'd spend most of my weekend days playing. It kind of became my number one hobby pretty quickly. But one of the things that I really wasn't prepared for was just how much this map changes and evolves over time. I mean, I understood that we were on the third iteration of this chapter map, or excuse me, the third iteration of this game's map in Chapter 3. I understood that there had been a Chapter 1 and a Chapter 2 previously, and that those were entirely different maps from what we had here, but I really wasn't prepared for just how much this game evolves and changes. Moving in from Season 3 into Season 4, from Vibin' into Paradise, I kind of got my first taste of how much this game can change. Truth be told, as much as I loved playing the game of Fortnite, I really didn't like the Chrome season. Of course, I know I'm not alone in that sentiment. Not a lot of people seem to like the Chrome season. For me, it wasn't even, the mechanics of it all that bothered me, or the Chrome weapons, which I will admit were pretty annoying. It was actually the map changes that caused me to not really enjoy that season as much. I felt like it had taken some of my previously favorite drop spots on the map, Tilted Towers, the Sanctuary, and it had corrupted them, which, let's face it, that was the theme of the season. It was supposed to be a corrupted map. But I didn't really enjoy it that much. So in a lot of ways, I really just had one season on the Chapter 3 map that I fell in love with. But that season still holds such a special place in my heart, not just because it was the first season I ever played on the game, but because looking back on it, it was just such a fun and enjoyable map to play on. Once we moved into Chapter 4, it took me a little bit to get into it, but after a little while, I grew to really love Chapter 4, and as it were, Chapter 4 is also always going to have a special place in my heart, because that was the first chapter that I played start to finish. I played every single season of that chapter. But at the end of that chapter, something kind of unexpected happened. The year was 2023, and wouldn't you know it, Epic finally gave the community what they had been asking for years at this point. They brought back the Chapter 1 OG map. Now, as someone that started playing the game late in its life, having only experienced part of Chapter 3 and all of Chapter 4, I had to admit, I wasn't actually all that excited about the Chapter 1 map. I mean, it seemed cool when I heard it was coming, and I started seeing, the trailer and all of that. But when I actually dropped in, my first thought was, well, God, this map's not as good as Chapter 4. Hell, it's not even as good as Chapter 3. But then I started playing the game, and I had such a blast that season. I'm not going to necessarily say that it's my favorite season of all time. I would certainly put it in top 4 or top 5. But it's hard to argue that it's, not ranking right up there, tied for number 1 with maybe 1 or 2 other seasons as being the season that I had the most fun playing in. And the reason I had such fun playing in it, I think, is because the community as a whole was having such a good positive experience with this 1 month OG season. I played it almost every day for that month, and I really fell in love both with the Chapter 1 map and with the concept of returning and revisiting old chapters maybe once a year. There was a lot of speculation at the end of OG. Would they do it again next year? Would they do a Chapter 2 OG? Should there be a Chapter 3 OG? At the time, they even made jokes. Well, God, are we going to have a Chapter 4 OG in a few years? But I'm here to tell you that, yes, I think we should have a Chapter 3 OG or a Chapter 4 OG. Now, obviously, we can't call it that. I mean, there was a lot of debate whether or not you should even classify a Chapter 2 as OG. But I do think that Chapter 3 would be a map if we went back and revisited for a 1 month season that the community would really, really get behind and would really, really enjoy. So yes, there were the naysayers that said, oh, Chapter 3 is the worst map we've ever seen. It's the worst the game's ever been. The game's dying. Fortnite is going to be dead. There'll never be anything beyond Chapter 3. This is the end of the game. And again, in Season 3 vibing, I can see why people thought that. In a lot of ways, it felt like the game had, for all intents and purposes, died. I mean, sure, Battle Royale was still happening, people were still dropping into the game, but the storyline had seemingly ended. And people really weren't sure what was going to happen going forward. Of course, with the benefit of hindsight, we have seen what has happened to the nostalgia train within the Fortnite community. Yes, Season OG was new heights for Fortnite. It had reached, I want to say it was the highest player count they had ever had concurrently. If not, certainly one of the highest player counts they'd ever had, especially for that month. It was something like 100 million people played the game. It was kind of insane. And it was a glorious time to be playing the game. Even for someone like myself that had never experienced Chapter 1 or Chapter 2, I actually found the OG season to be a lot of fun. Then, at the end of Chapter 4, of course, at the end of Chapter 5, at the end of Chapter 5, we dropped in to Chapter 2 Remix. Now, I don't know if it's because I just didn't dig the Chapter 2 map as much as I dig the Chapter 1 map, or if it was because they remixed it and brought all the rappers and it wasn't a true, kind of recreation of Chapter 2. But for whatever reason, I didn't really get into that season. I did play a little bit here and there, but it didn't hook me the way Season 1 OG had. Then we dropped into Chapter 6. Now, Chapter 6, in a lot of ways, has felt like a return to form for Fortnite. It certainly is much, much more well-received than Chapter 5 was. There's a lot of people that sit there and will rank it, right up there with their favorite chapters, which effectively, for depending on who you are, either Chapter 1 or Chapter 2. A lot of people have a lot of love for Chapter 4. Chapter 6 is definitely holding the community's attention in a way that the other recent, quote-unquote, modern versions of Fortnite just really haven't been able to, I would argue. That was until we dropped into the first mini-season of this chapter, Mini-Season 1, Galactic Battle, the Star Wars season. Now, I have to admit, I thought that season was going to be absolute peak Fortnite. I thought the community was going to love it, and I honestly expected it to have as much hype and as many players playing as Season OG did. But as it turns out, that wasn't the case at all. It ended up having some of the lowest player count numbers that Fortnite had seen in years. And for whatever reason, the community just didn't seem to like it. They didn't embrace it. Thankfully, we moved into Chapter 6, Season 3 proper, even though technically this is the 4th season of this chapter, but we're all just going to pretend like the Galactic Battle season just didn't happen. So this is Season 3. And it's captured the community in a way that no other Season 3 since I've started playing the game has. Certainly not Chapter 3, Season 3 Vibin'. Certainly not Chapter 4, Season 3 Wilds. And let's not forget Chapter 5, Season 3 Wrecked. All 3 of these seasons have been some of the least well-received seasons of any chapter in Fortnite. And the fact that they all seem to hit at the same time of the year, at the same point in the chapter, seems to be kind of telling. Around this time, though, we also started hearing that at the end of this chapter, it appears anyway, that we're not going to get any other of those sort of OG remix, revisiting of a previous chapter mini-season. No. Instead, they're saying that we're going to get a Simpsons-themed mini-season. Don't get me wrong. I love The Simpsons. Again, I'm 40 years old. I've been watching The Simpsons since it first came out, when I was a wee little lad. It's a great show, and I love it to this day. It's been a few years since I've watched any of the new seasons and episodes of the new seasons, but the last time I did watch it, which would have been probably 4, 5, 6 years ago, something like that, I watched, I think for 1 or 2 years, I watched every episode of those seasons, and I thought it was great. I still think it's a great show. But I don't think that doing a Simpsons-themed mini-season is going to do anything positive for the game of Fortnite. I think if perhaps you made a separate game mode that was Simpsons themed, maybe for those of you that might remember the game Crazy Taxi, you'd have to be over a certain age probably to remember that game. There was a Simpsons version, I don't remember what they called it, but it was a game where the whole thing was set in Springfield and you were Homer Simpson driving a taxi trying to get people through the town of Springfield. That, I do think, could work really well as a crossover in Fortnite. But dropping Simpson-themed POIs into the main Battle Royale, I just don't think is going to capture the community the way that Fortnite wants it to. Which brings me back to Chapter 3. The thing that I don't think a lot of people realize is that Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 are not the only chapters that can hold a monopoly on nostalgia. The fact is, it doesn't really matter when you started playing the game. Odds are, if you started playing the game later in life, you're going to have similar feelings of nostalgia for those seasons and that chapter that the OGs had for Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. The fact is, when I dropped into this creative map here, you see, because I don't even have any footage from Chapter 3. While I did start playing the game in Chapter 3, I didn't make my YouTube channel until about midway through Chapter 4. I have zero footage from Chapter 3. But I was able to find this creative map, a couple creative maps actually. Just went into the Discovery tab, searched for Chapter 3, and I found what appeared to be, I would assume it's from the same creator. One map was just called Chapter 3 Revibed Playground, and the other was Chapter 3 Revibed Duos. The Duos being more of a traditional Battle Royale experience, Playground obviously being more of like a battle lab or just, open world, no storm, anything like that. And it gave me a chance to go back and really explore the Chapter 3 map, and man, all these memories just came rushing back and came flooding back. And I have to admit, that same level of nostalgia that so many people felt for the Chapter 1 map when OG dropped, that's how I feel about Chapter 3. And I think that looking back on it now, we've had 3 years have passed since Chapter 3 ended. I really do believe that the community would have a blast dropping back into the Chapter 3 map. Whether you were someone that loved Chapter 3, whether you were someone that hated Chapter 3, I would argue that we could all agree that revisiting the Chapter 3 map for a month would do a lot more and would be a lot more fun for the community than dropping into a Simpsons map. Let's think about it. Chapter 3 was the very first modern Fortnite map. It was the first chapter that had exactly 4 seasons. Perfect for a 1-month OG mini-season, revisit, revived, remixed, whatever you want to call it. Chapter 3, Chapter 4, even Chapter 5. These are the chapters that are perfect for a mini-season. And that is why I would love it if Epic would bring back Chapter 3 with a 4-week mini-season. If they were to do that, I honestly think that it would do better than Chapter 2 Remix in a lot of ways. Chapter 3, Chapter 4, even Chapter 5. They are the perfect chapters for a remix, revisiting, revived type of a season. Epic, please, let's go back and revisit the Chapter 3 map. Chapter 3 was a turning point for this game. And even though it maybe wasn't as well received at the time as you would have liked it, Chapter 3 holds a special place in a lot of people's hearts. If you're someone that started playing the game in Chapter 3, it's always going to be special. If you're one of those people that left in Chapter 2 but came back in Chapter 3, it's always going to be special. Don't give us a Simpsons season. Give us a Chapter 3 Revived season. That's what we want.